Your introduction and your discussion are the two sections that are so content heavy. This is where you have to write for yourself. It's not like the results section where you can, just put a graph or just put a table and the reader can, analyze it for themselves. This is your introduction and your discussions is where the reader, really gets to know you as the author of the scientific paper, as the scientist themselves. And so it's very important that these sections are very neatly written and show your true self as that scientific writer, and you can get that message across really well. And so there's so much when comes to writing a discussion, as there is with nearly every other section about in the scientific report. And it's really important that you don't mess this one up, as well as the introduction, because here you're creating that connection with the reader. And so those are the two key important sections. And if you look at, and I used to, I didn't understand this. And so whenever I wrote scientific papers, like I wrote one on bridges, truss formations, and this is what it looks like. This is what my discussion section looks like. First of all, I printed it on yellow paper, which is something you should never do. And if you look closely, this is my discussion section. And what I've done here is that I've placed a graph. So look, I didn't know. This should have gone in the results section, right? The graph. And if you look at the language, some of it's good, some of it's extremely trash. And so I can't create that connection with the reader that I want to. And so this is the place where the reader really gets to know me. And this is one of those important, concepts. And this is what I'm doing. I'm putting images of graphs in this. And my language is not very good. And it's written on yellow paper. So there's so much improvement that needs to be done, and there's so many concepts that need to be understood when writing a discussion. And today I'm going to share those concepts with you, what it takes to write a discussion. Okay, let's get straight into it. Key points. First of all, it's important to understand, how I said the introduction and the discussion are really close and really where the reader gets to know you. Well, luckily, they're also the exact opposites of each other. And so in the introduction, how I said you start off broad, and you can refer to the introduction video. You start off broad and then you go in narrow, and you want to start off with the field or topic. If you're talking about classical physics, start with classical physics, then go to the existing research and knowledge, then identify your gap. What are you addressing? Then go specifically into your paper and your study. And when you get to the discussion, you want to do the exact opposite. So here you're coming in from the field and you're linking it to your paper. Here, you want to link your paper to the field in the discussion section. So you start with your paper, then you address the response or the problem, then you want to map your study to existing research and knowledge, then you want to talk about your contribution to the field. So I start off by talking about classical physics. I'll begin with classical physics. I'll, take a small section, astronomy, in my introduction. Then I'm going to identify a gap in astronomy. I'll say Newton's universal law of gravitation does not apply on planets, even though it does. And then in the discussion, I'm going to talk about what my paper talks about. Then I'm going to say this is why Newton's universal law of gravitation does not apply to planets. Then I'm going to map it to the existing research and knowledge in the astronomy field. And then I'm going to talk about how I contributed to the entire field itself. And so this is, a model that you need to keep in mind. Like, take a screenshot of this. This is extremely important. So now let's look at the key points, like the key things that you want to ensure when you're writing the discussion section. And so it doesn't turn out looking something like this. Okay, first of all, you want to identify the purpose, identify the impact of your research, because there's so many different types of aims and hypotheses, and your paper is not going to be the same. You're not going to be addressing the same type of question as someone else's paper. So there are four key impacts of your research. First of all, you obtained identical or similar results to other studies with a modified and improved method. So you modified an improved method and you obtained similar results to other studies. So then what will your main contribution be? You want to find your main contribution. Here, your main contribution is the method. Secondly, you obtained better results than other studies. Here, you did something to obtain better results than other studies. Your results are more precise. Your main contribution are the results themselves. Thirdly, you've been a game changer. You've revolutionized the field of study. And so then your main contribution is the impact that you've had on the literature or research world. Fourthly, You've identified or created new applications in the real world. So here, your main contribution would be the industry itself. And this is something that's really common in fields like civil engineering, where they have to, find applications of concrete, let's say, or find applications of structures or bridges or something like that. And so those papers, are directed to the industry. And that's why that's a very common, use of purpose of scientific papers. Okay, second key point, never claim priority. Don't try and be the best. Basically, if you try and show that you're intellectually superior and you say, our study was the first to have done this, or our study was the first to have done this, it only ends up making you sound dumb. Because imagine boasting in real life and you're talking with a group of people and you're boasting towards them, like, look at me, I've achieved this and that and that. No one wants to hear that. You just want to state your implications, state your insights. And if the insights are really good, other scientific papers will acknowledge it in the form of citing your paper. And so you don't want to ever claim priority. You don't ever want to show that you're the best. You want to prove it. Prove that why your paper, has something different. And if it does, and that doesn't mean go and state it. You want to have, really good insights, a really good discussion section, just claims priority. So never explicitly claim priority, but show why, your paper, please try and make your paper be good. Show that your paper is good, and you'll get, that priority from other people in that field, and they'll cite your paper. Okay, citations to mention similar insights. When you're talking about discussions, right, you're providing insights on the results. So you're talking about what, the results have to offer and what we can learn from them. And in most cases, other people have probably gotten similar results. Not exactly point results that, oh, this increased by 2.5%, and the other result says, oh yes, this increased by 2.5% as well. Not those specific kind of results, although that depends on the nature of the paper. But you could, say a similar trend, a similar proportional trend was noticed in this paper published this, right? And so what that does is that it reinforces your paper. It makes your paper sound more reliable to your reader, and they'll, start trusting your paper even more. Even if they don't visit those papers, those other cited papers, they'll think that, look, this person's paper, they've done the research, and I think they're pretty credible, even if they don't visit the other papers. Now, don't unnecessarily repeat the results. Use brackets instead. When we're writing about insights on the results, we'll often spend 1 or 2 sentences stating the results themselves, and then we'll talk about the insights. Now, there's limitations on how much pages and how many words you can spend on each section. So spending too many words or taking up too much space for stating the results, that's only going to waste the amount of time, the amount of space or words you have to, actually talk about the insights. So never waste, don't repeat the results in the discussions, because the aim of your research is not simply to obtain and describe results. It is to make sense of those results in the context of existing knowledge, and to say something sensible and useful about their implications. So what you want to do here is that instead of unnecessarily repeating the results, you want to shorten it. If you have to use it, shorten it, but don't repeat your results, because you're taking up unnecessary space. So let's look at some phrases you can use. As you can see here, the first point on the second slide is that these are a few key phrases that you can use: as hypothesized. Now, what does this phrase "as hypothesized" achieve? This, when you say "as hypothesized, this happened and that happened," what you're doing is you're starting at the introduction and your method, where you first stated the hypothesis. When you say "as hypothesized," you're going straight back there, and then people will say, as they hypothesize. Okay, so then let me check the results. Is it really happened how it hypothesized? So you're connecting your introduction with your results, and now as you're writing this in your discussion, you're connecting everything. So using these phrases helps combine your paper and helps it sound more whole. It makes it feel, it creates this flow, which is really important in scientific writing. So use some of these phrases. Also come up with your own. And so these really, take less space and they connect your paper. So they take less space and they don't compromise on the flow. Secondly, your language should reflect your confidence. Let's say you want to make a claim, but you're not that, confident on what you're talking about. Let's say you want to say something about, let's say you found an insight in the data and you want to talk about it, but you're not that confident. then talk about it. Don't say that if I'm not confident, I'm not going to talk about it. Still talk about it, but use language to, show confidence. If you're sure that this is the insight, that this is a key insight and this has to have happened, then say this is related to. And if you're not that confident, say something like this could be related to. Change your modality and change your confidence when talking about, concepts that you understand or don't understand. So, change your language depending on how much you understand the topic you're talking about. Okay, position your limitation in a discussion based on context. Now, when it comes to writing the discussion, always talk about the limitations that you've had. Because let's be honest, when we start writing the scientific method for a scientific paper, we're going to write a method, we're going to do the experiment, and then we're going to be like, oh, I could have done this better. And then we're going to do the experiment again, and there has to be one point where we stop and we're like, okay, I can't keep redoing the experiment. I have to work with the data that I have collected yet as of this time. And so there's always going to be improvements, but at one point you're going to have to start writing the rest of the paper. And so here you want to position your limitation. So there's always going to be limitations, so always write about your limitations. And the second thing that you want to do is that, let's say your limitation gives you scope for research. Let's say the limitation that you had, or you think can fuel future research. So what you do here is that you position that limitation towards the end. And because when the reader reads your paper, the last thing that sticks with them is the limitation. Let's say you wanted to prove something about astronomy and you did an experiment here on Earth. Now you're going to say the fact that I did it on Earth is my limitation. Now what is the reader going to do? Since it's at the end, they will think about it, and if they can, they'll do that research in space and they'll publish another paper linked to your research. And so they've used your limitation as a direction. On the other hand, let's say you had some improvements to the method. Let's say your way of releasing the pendulum wasn't ideal. So you could say, I could have released it. So when you're talking about, in your discussion section, when you're at the early stages of your discussion section and you're talking about how the results were related to the insights, you can talk about how this limitation impacted your results. So you want to, position your limitations based on where you are at in your discussion. And so this kind of leads into the next point. Try and end with a key limitation or application. This can fuel further research. So when you end with a limitation, you're setting a direction. You're telling the reader that, look, this is where I want to take this paper. And if you have those serious readers, they'll do something with your information. They will take it in a direction. Thirdly, provide background information. In most cases, you think of improvements or see them after you complete the experiment. The thing is, read this. The thing is, you're always going to want to add improvements, but it isn't practical. And I've mentioned this before. You're going to do the experiment and you're going to be like, oh, I could have done this better. Oh yeah, I should have done this. But then at one point you just have to move on. You can't keep focusing on what you could have done better, because then there's going to be no due date. You're going to keep on researching. There's going to be no end to your research. So you want to provide background information. So let's take a look at this deeply. Let's say you're talking about a specific point. Let's say you're talking about a specific limitation. Let's just take the example of a pendulum. Now there's two key ways that I know when it comes to releasing a pendulum. You put your hand, the pendulum's here, you release it, and the pendulum swings. But the thing is, when I release it with my hand, I subconsciously add a little push to it, which mucks up my results. Now another way I can do is that I can have a pendulum, I attach it to a string that's attached to a retort stand, and the pendulum is tied with that string. What I do is I burn that string, and when that string burns, the string cuts and the pendulum starts moving. And here there's no additional push. So when I talk about my method, I'm going to say the pendulum, and in the method section I'm going to say the pendulum was released released with my hand. But then in my discussion section, I'm going to provide background information. I'm going to refer to that, that extra string and that burning mechanism. And I'm going to provide background information on that. And then I'm going to link it to my discussions. So it may seem odd, but if you need to, add background information into your discussion section because it's important. Okay, these are some examples over here of limitations. To mitigate such error, it is recommended to change the release mechanism such that the pendulum is suspended by a thread. Not only is this a widely used testing mechanism used in, then refer to a paper, but also increases the validity. The motion of the satellite can be applied to other physical contexts, most notably in Newtonian mechanics. Satellite movement is related to Newton's universal law of gravitation, where, and then you state the formula and you go. So these are kind of like the things. This is where you have to provide background information. See, look at these examples. And so, although it may not seem important in your introduction and your method, you might realize, look, this is important, but not too important to put into discussions or not needed yet. And this is where I need them, so I'll provide that. So this is how the examples show how you put background information into your discussion section. Next. Okay, how do you model your discussion? There are 9 key things. Announce the structure or content of the discussion section. State the achievement or contribution of the study. Revisit background information, literature, to reboot the reader. That's another reason why you want background information. Revisit gap in method, so why you did the research. Revisit results and explore their implications. We've talked about this. Map to literature. So, you know how I constantly say, if you check the results, if you check the previous videos, I say that you want to lead your reader in a direction. And that's where they, get that idea. And in the discussions, you want to take them on that journey. And when you're taking them on that journey, they can put your paper into a specific context. As in this case, look, they map to literature, knowledge for comparison or support. They'll put your paper alongside other papers and say, I think here is a good place for this paper to sit, along with, let's say, this paper on biology and that paper on biology. I find this place. So you want the reader to be able to place your paper in a context of other papers, of other scientific papers. 7, identify potential limitations and suggestions for future work. This is where you're giving them that direction for those serious readers. Restate the achievement, contribution, impact of the study, and identify potential applications. So always end on a happy note. Let's look at an example. Example, an assessment of post-read 2D sequelae in deceased survivors. Now, you can check the sources for this and for more information, for more detail, but what I've essentially done here is I've taken this example and I've put it into a tabulated form and I've color coded it so it's easier. And as you can see, how those categories that we looked at in the previous slide are put into here, and how the writer has used them. And we can see the purpose of each sentence. This is a sentence by sentence breakdown. So at first, to our knowledge, blah blah blah, largest study of patients viral disease V2D and provides a key contribution to family. So see, the writer explicitly identifies the contribution. So you start with a bang, you start with the importance of your research. Then the writer identifies a specific novel feature of the study. So now you want to go into that specific feature that your paper was all about. Our study is the first to record a wide range of post-V2D and provides clear evidence that survivors who experience a given symptom during V2D are also present closely within 300 days following the infection. Now, in the next section, the writer revisits the results. This was particularly true in relation, some hearings, blah blah blah. See, as you can see here, the writer wants to specifically, is giving that space for the reader. Now the reader will be like, okay, so this was particularly true. Let me look back to that figure. They're not going to look back to any other figure. They're going to look back to figure 1, as you can see in the third sentence. A key finding, so they revisit the results. Then the writer mentions the potential application. So this has clear implications, blah blah blah, for public health. Related public health matters suggest that when resources are limited, cardiac screening priority could be given to adults. So this is the potential applications in the health industry. Then the writer mentioned the limitation of the study. So what went wrong? However, this was not just formally during the study that led to problems. Okay, 8th, the writer mentions background factual information in the literature is known to persist upon conclusion whilst also restating it. So now they've looked at background information, and you can see in that sentence they've used the word is known to persist. Now they go into background information. And this the reason they're stating this background information is because it links to their applications and their implications, which they wouldn't have needed to talk about when in the method. And because they need to talk about the implications and applications in the discussion, they think that this piece of background information is essential for the readers to know about. So V2D RNA is known to persist in the bodies of survivors long after the disease onset, and the results of our study provide compelling evidence that follow-up all convalescent patients is warranted for at least 10 months after discharge from hospital. And then you want to end on a positive note, as I said before. The writer closes strongly with the application of the study. In addition, the study provides evidence-based guidance for blah, 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 blah. Okay, now the one thing that I don't like about this example is if you look at the second sentence. Our study is the second sentence. Our study is the first to record a wide range of post-V2D complications. So I think for this paper it might have been necessary, because this is something that this paper is something that is out of my academic radar. And so when it says our study is the first to record, I don't like this idea of giving priority, but I think it might have been needed for this research paper. And so yeah, post V2D complications, I think that would have been, if in this case it was a key need in this paper to talk about the post complications, and so they had to mention that it was the first to record it, and that kind of makes up for why there were no citations in that section. But yeah, don't unnecessarily boast. If your paper is one of the first to do something, and that's the key quality about your paper, then I guess you can talk about it, but don't use it for unnecessary boasting that we were the first to do this. So yeah, and this is how you write your discussion section. I hope you've learned something and you've enjoyed the video. Okay, now in the next video we're going to look at how to write the conclusion of your paper, and then after that the abstract. So I hope you've learned something. I hope you found this useful. Yeah, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. Keep grinding, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.